Oh, part two of the paranormal phenomenon question. As I stated last time, the question of, well, let me recap part one a little bit. I suggested that we, in analyzing any kind of claim of the paranormal, you first exclude any and all possible scientific explanations. Okay. So if that's what people mean by extraordinary claims and extraordinary arguments, I agree with them to a point. However, a scientific explanation that would be in mainstream science truly has to explain the phenomenon. It can't explain something that's like the phenomenon or what it could be like or what it might have been confused with. Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay, definitely in the case of the dear lady who called into a radio station and talked about seeing a radio program, an internet program, and talked about seeing a second sun exactly where Venus happens to be. Pretty good way to rule that one out. The moon is a hologram. Pretty good way to rule that one out. Just go look at the tides, okay? Some of the other stuff going around, I can't even think of it right now. There are definitely things that can be ruled out. Then you have the possibility of a hoax, a guy in a gorilla suit as Bigfoot. Could happen, it's possible. I don't know enough about the Patterson film to claim one way or the other. Definitely Bigfoot would fit potentially within, if I were to speculate about some branch of, I don't know, maybe not Erectus, maybe Habilis or something, something way back in the hominid family tree branching off. Could be. Could be some, maybe the Denisovans grew some more hair than they had before. Who knows? Like I say, I don't know enough to say. I don't know enough to rule it out. But it's possible that there is a phenomenon. It's also possible there might be hoaxes. It's possible the two are mixed into one. Then you have to rule out, I think, a more complicated possible explanation, and that is if you go back into the history of psychological warfare, you do see something called the superstition psyop, and that has been used in wartime. And, we have in this country had a history of operations against targeted people, and that's, I sort of was loath to get into that last time, but there is the history of COINTELPRO and the history of that type of thing. And as Jacques Vallée pointed out in Messengers of Deception, the paranormal has been used in intelligence operations. Now, that might seem irrational in its own way to a lot of you, but I would suggest looking into it. Google superstition psyop. It's right there, acknowledged in the military's own literature. I don't claim to be an expert on that. And I'm not suggesting that the mainstream science explanation, the bunch of guys on Saturday night explanation, and then the alternative narrative that would be more conspiratorial than paranormal, that the three of these can explain everything. Because I would say that stretches credibility to think that those three things can necessarily explain all claims of the paranormal. And I forgot to mention the cognitive science. That'd be kind of in the mainstream, but it'd be a little bit more of the workings of our brain. That definitely, you can't rule these things out. But are you going to say that this explains an entire class of phenomena? And I'm loath to give such a reductionistic idea my own personal seal of approval. I don't think that it can. However, there is the question, just like within mainstream science, you have nuclear energy, you have these types of things. Just because you can genetic engineering, just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. So it is in the realm of the paranormal that there might be the same question of ethics. The spiritual philosophies of both the West and East warn against, in the East they warn against, on the quest for enlightenment, they warn against getting caught up with supernatural powers, okay? So the idea that they can lead to a false enlightenment. And then in the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you have the obvious warnings about that. That are even more overtly stated. I don't think in the East they talk about stoning people to death. That's pretty heavy duty. So I think in the East there's still a similar kind of warning. Definitely, we'll shy away from going in that direction here on this channel. I would say that if there is a phenomenon, then my suspicion would be that it would have some type of internal rigor to it. In regular Western science, we have mathematical equations that are believed to describe the physical universe we live in. You're familiar with E equals mc squared. There are explanations for time dilation. And there's also the equation describing the curvature of space that Einstein came up with, which has been called the most important equation that ever was, but most people don't know about it. And it describes the total mass energy of the universe and then relates that to the curvature of space. So my suspicion is if there is a paranormal realm, then it may have its own internal logic to it, whether mathematical or not. But I've already gone too far. And that's because I've gone beyond the knowledge available to me. And I have to be honest with that. It is entirely possible that many of these claims, such as Bigfoot perhaps, might have just normative scientific explanations, like a branch of the Denisovans or something like that, who came over the land bridge with the Native Americans. A lot of Native Americans don't accept the land bridge idea. I accept that, but it's the best working model that I have from my own educational background. So apparently the land bridge, apparently there is evidence that there were people here much earlier than the previous land bridge theory suggested. So up to 20,000 years ago. So I'll give that some justice there. Okay, well, in summation, I believe that any claim of the paranormal must be looked at skeptically. However, I also believe that a skeptical claim and it's ruling something out would be two different things. True and honest skepticism is about keeping your rational faculties. It's not about a conclusion that it's already arrived at before looking at the evidence. So there's two different phenomena here. I think if you're running around New Age gurus or you're running around people who claim to be anointed prophets or something of the like, the problem is they're not going to want you to question their doctrines. And so that becomes a problem, not so much whether you adhere to a scientific worldview versus a paranormal worldview. No, that becomes a problem as to whether you're able to keep your own rational faculties. Anybody who demands that I submit to some kind of authoritarian system of authority already has my suspicion right there. And so probably the biggest danger of the paranormal realm is not, there may be the dangers described in Eastern and Western religions, and I think one probably should take the possibility that if this phenomenon exists, it can be misused very seriously. But the other possible problem might be that in exploring and unhinging oneself from a rational worldview and believing anything, such as watery planets and moon as a hologram and second suns and 20-foot tall reptilians or whatever, then one might lose one's sense of balance, and that's a danger to guard against. All right, well, this concludes my two-part series on the paranormal. I know I haven't arrived at any conclusions that are definite, but that's the nature of the search for knowledge. If you're really honest about it, when there's an unknown, you call it an unknown. And that's exactly what I'm going to call the paranormal, an unknown. Thank you.